This is the final morning call for Air Canada.
Hey, I've been doing ministry now for a little over 7 years. I've been part of my time has been leading youth ministry. Part of my job has been leading a church now. I've kind of worked at a couple different churches over the course of my time working in ministry. And my favorite part about working in a church is being able to walk alongside people like you and like myself even, and experience the transformative work of what Jesus can do in people's lives. It's my favorite part, to sit with people and see them go from one version of themselves to them living out God's best for their life. It's my favorite part of doing what I get to do. But as a pastor, as somebody that walks with people, here's what I know, is I have walked with a lot of people that have said yes to Jesus. They've experienced the hope and purpose that comes in a relationship with Him. And then as they continue to walk with Jesus, they realize that not everything always is on the up and up. In that, sometimes things are hard. Even when you say yes to Jesus, and even when you say yes to what God has done for you through His Son on the cross, things in life are not always perfect. Things in life oftentimes are challenging, oftentimes are hard. And the question I get a lot of times is this: from whether it's a youth student or an adult that is new to their faith, they'll ask a question that will be similar to this. It's like, I thought following God was going to make things in my life better. I thought saying yes to Jesus was going to make everything in my life go well. See, and if you've been walking with Jesus long enough, it's really easy to realize that yes, everything in your life is going to be transformed, but that doesn't mean that it's always going to be smooth sailing. There's going to be hard times. There's going to be challenges. You see, in this series, Pack the Essentials, we've been walking through the book of Exodus, following the Israelites through their journey. And what we see this morning in the text is that the Israelites have been released from slavery. They have been stepping into freedom, and they were following God's direction. Last week we talked about, but what we're going to find out today is that sometimes, even when God provides freedom, sometimes when God really does show up in your story and your situation, it can still feel like the enemy is chasing you down. It can still sometimes feel like, man, you can't catch a break. How many of you have ever felt that in life? Like it just feels like, man, I just can't get ahead of this thing. See, last week we had the conversation about Jesus or God leading the people out of Israel and going kind of the long way and not the direct route to the land that He had promised for them, and them trusting the direction that He was going, Him leading them by a pillar of fire and a cloud of fire, or a cloud during the night and a pillar of fire at night. And what we see in that is that God leads us in every single step of the way. And what we saw in the story last week is that they did obey, but now they find themselves this moment. They're standing at the Red Sea, not knowing what to do next. And I think some of you in the room, I got a handful of texts from you this week that encouraged me. Like, man, the message was encouraging. I was able to take that faith step I've been meaning to take for months now, or for years. And I would assume this, that even though you took that faith step, even though last week you said yes to maybe the thing that God was leading you into, or yes into the thing that God had been asking you to do for months or years, is that it hasn't been perfect this week. You've still dealt with things. You see, as a dad, I have 3 kids. I have a 5-year-old on Tuesday. Rhodes will turn 5. I got a 3-year-old, and I got a little boy who just turned 1 a couple months ago. And what I've been working with my oldest daughter, Rhodes, on is this thing called consequences. And I've been trying to teach her that when you make good decisions, there are good consequences. And when you make poor decisions, there are poor consequences. And I remember a couple of weeks ago, I was having a conversation with Rhodes, and I said, Rhodes, what is a consequence? And she goes, when I do something bad and I get in trouble. And I'm like, yeah, I guess that's kind of true. But also, there are good consequences. When we make good decisions, good things tend to happen. But if you've lived long enough, you understand that it doesn't always go that way. You can do the right things, you can say the right things, you can be in the right situations, but things can still go poorly. And in life, you and I, oftentimes, myself included, I can tend to think that if life is going well, if things are going smooth, then I am on the right path. And on the contrary, I can think if things are going poorly, if I'm on the rocky road, if there are troubles that I am living within, if there are struggles that I am currently experiencing, man, maybe I'm not on the right path. See, I think sometimes in our walk with Jesus, we have to understand that even when we are doing the right thing, it doesn't mean everything around us is going to be going perfectly. You see, I think I could probably be doing a better job teaching my daughter that, yeah, most of the time, when you do the right thing, good things happen. Most of the time, when you do bad things happen, but sometimes it doesn't always work that way. See, in our story this morning, we're going to experience the Israelites after they've been led out of captivity. They've been led out of slavery, and they are in freedom, and they're going this direction, and they find themselves at the Red Sea, and they're stuck with nowhere to go. And in the meantime, Pharaoh had changed his mind. He had said, okay, you can go, you can have freedom, you can take the Israelites and take them to the promised land. They leave, they're following God, they find themselves at the Red Sea, and then they have nowhere to go. All the while, Pharaoh has changed his mind, and his armies are now chasing them down, and they're stuck. So this morning, as we jump into the message, I really want to answer a question and really talk about four things about what God's protection teaches us. Because here's what I know that we're going to see in the story this morning as we follow the Israelites in this moment is that we serve a God that no matter where you find yourself, no matter what you struggle with, no matter your life experience, we serve a God that is a protector. And so if you're following along in your notes, you can write this down. Point number one is that freedom doesn't mean we won't face fear. Freedom doesn't mean we won't face fear. You see, what's going on in this moment is the Israelites had experienced freedom. They had been following God. They had been experiencing the freedom that comes with God, leading them out of slavery. And then they find themselves stuck at the Red Sea, wondering why things are hard. You see, here's how it works for us today in 2025 most of the time. And I've heard from people here in this church, my friends, that would say, hey, I have started taking my faith seriously for the first time in this season. Or maybe they came to faith in our church since we've started. And since then, things have been going hard. And they've been asking the question, I thought when I gave my life to Jesus, things were going to get better. But it seems like things have gotten worse. Or maybe it's been, I decided to be faithful with my finances. I started to give, and then all of a sudden I got a pay cut at work, or I lost my job. It's the person that has said, you know what, I finally am gonna go and I'm gonna reconcile that relationship. I'm gonna work on the relationship. And in that moment of vulnerability, they experience betrayal, and they're like, I thought I was doing the right thing. It's the mom that experiences fear and anxiety about her kids, and in this season, she's been trying to hand it over to God and say, God, I trust you with my kids. I trust you with my family. But for some reason, they still experience that anxiousness. They still experience that anxiety and that fear. What does it look like for us today in 2025 to trust that God is a protector? And freedom doesn't just mean that we're going to never have fear, but we can trust that God is a protector in the process. And so the Israelites find themselves at the Red Sea. And then in Exodus chapter 14, verse 10 through 12, it's It's going to be on the screens. It's in your outline. It says this. It says, as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. See, what's interesting about this moment is that in the first moment of fear, in the first moment of their backs up against the wall, after God had freed them, they're standing at the Red Sea and the army is chasing them down. They don't know what their next step is. And the first thing they do is question, man, why aren't we just back in Egypt? Why did you just take us out here to die? Like it was better being a slave for the last 400 years than to die here in the wilderness. The first time their back was up against the wall, they began to question God's plan. See, I think for us, oftentimes we have a tendency, just like the Israelites, to romanticize our past a little bit. That it was either better than we thought it was, or in a situation that was really hard and challenging, when time kind of passes, we don't remember how bad it actually was. See, I know I have this same experience for myself. I've been walking with Jesus for the last 10 years faithfully. And what I have experienced is I look back on myself before I knew Jesus, and sometimes I can think, it wasn't that bad. The decisions I was making, they weren't that bad. But then as I begin to think about it, really what I experienced is there was some real brokenness there. I was dead in my sins. I was lost until Jesus found me and he brought me out. You see, and I think in our stories and in our experiences, what we need to realize when we are stuck, when we find ourselves with our back up against the wall, we don't begin to question if God has a plan. We don't begin to question if God has been with us along the journey. We just start to ask the question, God, what are you doing in this moment? You see, I think for us in 2025, we have a tendency to think that ease of life means we are doing the right thing. That if there's no bumps along the road, we must be following God's best for us. And if we feel stuck, and if we feel like things around us are falling apart, if we feel like there is fear in our lives, we feel like something is wrong in us when maybe God is just trying to show up in our lives in a different way that we couldn't experience without going through the fear or going through the struggle. You see, Jesus himself even experienced this a little bit as he was about to go to the cross, as he was about to die for the sins of the people, about to pay for the price of sins on the cross. Here's what happens in Matthew chapter 26, verse 38 through 39. It says, then he said to them, talking to his disciples, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me. And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. See, Jesus, the Savior of the world, even experienced pain and experienced fear, even though he knew he was doing the very thing God had sent him to do. See, you and I, wherever we find ourselves, we might be facing a hard situation. We might be facing a struggle, and what we're not supposed to do is question whether or not God is with us, but rather, what might God be doing? I think what we see in Jesus' response is a posture that we should take to God when things are hard. We should go to God honestly and say, God, I'm struggling. This is challenging. This is hard. God, take this from me if you will. God, but if that's not your plan, it's your plan over mine. You see, what we see in the posture of Jesus is that, freedom is what we get in a relationship with him, but it doesn't remove all fear. But we need to trust him in the midst of fear. The second point, the thing we learn, is that sometimes we are called to stand and wait. How many of you know in life, sometimes you just got to stand and you got to wait for God to move? How many of you in this room, you would say that you are a patient person? Raise your hand. Okay, we got like literally three people. Okay, I wasn't raising my hand for myself. I am not, I struggle with patience. You see, so Jacob just laughed at me because he knows me too well. My gosh, that's good. Okay, we're talking about the Israelites at the Red Sea. Okay, so the Israelites, they find themselves at the Red Sea. They're stuck. They're scared. They have nowhere to go. There's a big body of water in front of them, and the Israelites are coming down their neck. And in Exodus chapter 14, verse 13 through 14, Moses answered the people. He says, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." You see, I think so many of us in this room, I don't know your story. I don't know your background. I don't know what you're facing right now in this season, but I think some of us need to hear this morning that we need to not try and act on God's behalf and be the God in our own lives to control everything, but rather to sit and to wait and to trust that the God of the universe will show up in the right time. I don't know what you're facing, but I know we serve a God that is a protector. You might be in a hard season right now, and the call for you this morning is to not jump in and to take control, but rather to trust that the protector is in control. See, I remember when my wife was just sharing about our daughter. I remember when she was getting surgery to get cochlear implants. So she was born deaf. When she was 11 months old, we took her to Seattle Children's to get cochlear implants. She has 2 cochlear implants now so she can hear. And I remember that surgery day specifically. I took the day off work and we woke up early and we had to get to Seattle Children's down in Seattle at about 7 a.m. and she couldn't eat for the last 12 hours, and so she was upset. We were upset, because if you have kids, you get it. And we were taking her there, and we got to Seattle Children's, and they bring her in, and they put her in her little gown, my little 11-month-old little girl. And I remember in that moment experiencing true fear. Like my 11-month-old little girl, yeah, sure, she's deaf and she can't hear, but she's perfectly healthy otherwise. She has no issues. She has no problems. And I remember that moment as I was rolling her back to the operating room going, man, what if something happens in there? Like what if something happens and she leaves that room worse than she went in? What if she experiences something that is challenging? And there was real fear because the surgery didn't change her health. It just made it so she could hear. Everything else was good. And I remember that moment experiencing real, true fear and having to sit and be still and to trust God. You see, I think oftentimes you and I, we have a tendency when we find ourselves in a moment of fear, we like to grab the reins. It's easy to trust God when things are going good, but it's hard to trust Him when it feels like nothing is moving in the right direction. You see, when we try to take the reins when things in our lives are going haywire or going hard or different than we thought they would, it would be like me in that moment with my daughter, Ren. In the moment of fear when I've just rolled her back into the operating room, for me to walk in and to go, okay, doctor, I want to help. I want to grab the scalpel and I want to participate and take control of what is going on in that moment. I would never do that. Why? Because I'm not smart enough. I'm not a doctor. I don't know what to do. See, but why do we try to do that in our life when the God of the universe is already in control? When He's already moving on our behalf? Our call is not to grab the reins. Our call is to wait and to allow Him to be the one that moves. In Psalm chapter 121, verse 3 through 4, it says this. It says, He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, He who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. Hear me, friends. We serve a God that is not surprised about what is going on in your life. We serve a God that is not sleeping on the job. He looks out for His people. He intimately knows what you are walking through in this moment and what you will walk through in the future. And your job is to not be into control, but to trust that He is, and that He is a protector. My third point, you can write this down, is that faith is taking a step when you don't understand. See, what I love about this is that, yeah, we're supposed to be still and we're supposed to wait, but at the same time, we're supposed to move. So it doesn't mean that being still and waiting means we do nothing, that we just sit at our house and we wait for God to give us what we've been asking for, but we don't go out and try to do our part. But we do wait for Him to open the right doors. But we still have to move. We still have to move in these moments. And in Exodus chapter 14, verse 15 through 16 says this. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground.'" Can you imagine this moment? You're standing at the Red Sea, an army is chasing you down. You cry out to God and He says, "Why are you crying out to me? Move on." And then He tells him to lift up his staff, put it in the water, and He will part the Red Sea. He will spread the sea apart and make the ground dry so that they can walk through on dry ground and they can experience freedom. You see, what I love about this moment is God is saying, even though you don't know what is ahead, even though you don't know how I'm going to show up, even though you don't know exactly what I'm going to do, I am telling you to continue to move in faith even when you do not understand. See, for us this morning, I don't know what you're walking with. I don't know what questions you have in life. Maybe it was something you felt like God was leading you to do last week, but you couldn't muster up the faith to do it. Man, having faith is saying, I'm going to take the step even though I don't even know where my foot is going to land. It's having the faith to say, I know God will protect me in the process. See, here's how this shows up in our lives practically. See, I think this Christian life, this faith thing that God calls us to, honestly, a lot of times it doesn't make sense. Like what He asks us to do, there's a reason why He says to take a faith step, to step out in faith. It's because what we are supposed to do as followers of Jesus, what we're called to do as Jesus followers is contrary to what the culture might say to us. Let me give you a few examples. Things that I think we should be doing as followers of Jesus. The first is to pursue reconciled relationships even when there's still hurt. The world would say, no, you shouldn't do that. You need to protect your own peace. You got to protect your peace and then they can figure it out on their own. It's the saying yes to what you feel like God is calling you to in your career, in your business, even when you feel like you don't have all the answers in it and it doesn't make sense yet. And the world would say, you know what? No, you have to have everything figured out before you even take a faith step. And I think God would say, no. Trust that I will provide for you. Maybe it's knowing that you should be starting counseling or starting to confess some things that have been deep down that you've never shared with people. It's being honest for the first time about what you've experienced in life. And the world would say, no, don't open up until you feel completely safe. And God would say, no, trust that I can move in mighty and powerful ways. Maybe it's around the area of finances. Maybe you're like, you know what, I want to trust God with my finances. I want to give generously. And the world would say, no, you need to look out for yourself first. You need to make sure that you're covered. Maybe it comes to your prayer life and you're like, you know what, I feel like I should be praying these bold prayers for God to show up in mighty and powerful ways in my life, in my family, in my business. I feel like I should be praying these bold prayers, and the world would go, don't get your hopes up. Don't get your hopes up. You can only lean on yourself. See, in this moment in the story, we see the Israelites standing at the Red Sea and God saying, why are you crying out to me? I'm asking you to move. Let me ask this question this morning. What if the miracle in your life won't come before you take a step? Because it shows up after you take the first step. It shows up when you take that step of faith. Where the world says, man, you need to protect your peace, God says, man, I'm the one that brings peace and hope to your heart, even in a broken relationship. Where the world says you need to have all of your career moves dialed in and they need to be figured out before you take a faith step, God says, I don't equip the called, I don't call the equipped, I equip the called. God shows up when we take the faith step. Where the world says, don't open up until you're ready, God says, man, if you open up, if you're honest, what I can do with the real honest version of yourself is so much more than the fake masked version of you. Where the world says that you shouldn't give generously, you need to make sure your 401k is dialed in. You need to make sure you have savings. You got to make sure you're taken care of first. God says, look what I can do when you have open hands and an open heart. Look what I can do when you are generous, when you take that faith step. In your prayer lives, when the world says, don't get your hopes up with big prayers, God says, knock and the door will be open. Seek and you will find. You see, this faith journey is not about us having all the right answers. This faith journey is not about us having it all figured out before we step. It's having the faith to move before we know that he's going to part the Red Sea at all. So my question for you this morning is, what faith step do you need to take? Where do you need to trust God that he will show up in your situation and in your story, that he will protect you along the way? My fourth and final point, you can write this down, is that God goes before you and covers behind you. What we learn about God being a protector is that God goes before you and covers behind you. In Exodus chapter 14, verse 19 through 22, it says this. It says, then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's armies, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to the one side and light to the other side, so neither went near the other all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. See, what I think is interesting about this moment is that what God does is that cloud that was leading them in the chapters that we were just reading the last couple weeks actually moves from its position, from being in front of them and leading them and going behind them, to create a separation between their enemy and where they were. That you and I this morning, we have a God that when we take a faith step, he has not only gone before us, but he also protects behind us. See, I think sometimes in life, taking a faith step is so scary because we don't know that God is gonna show up. But as you've been walking with Jesus for longer, when you see him show up in the past, it makes it easier to say yes to the things that he's calling you to now because you've seen him be faithful in the seasons before. You see, I want to share a very practical, simple example where God has shown up in Hannah and I's life. About 4 years ago, Hannah and I, we kind of stretched ourselves to take a faith step to buy a house here in Monroe. And I remember that first summer, it was actually right around this time. It was right when my grass had died. And I was like, I don't want my grass to be yellow. And so I started trying to bring it back. And so I got all these sprinklers and these timers, and I started just drenching my lawn with water. And I was like, this is going to be great. And at the end of July, one of my neighbors drove by, and he said to me, he said, hey, Mike, your grass is the greenest out of anybody in all of downtown Monroe. I'm like, come on, praise God. And then I got the water bill. And no joke, I got the water bill, and the water bill was $700. And I was like, that is the stupidest investment I've ever made in my life. And my grass looked great. And that day, I stopped watering the grass. And I remember in that moment, Hannah and I, money was a little bit tight right then. We had just kind of bought the house, and so we had kind of put everything that we had into the down payment, and so things were a little bit tight. And I remember it was hard to trust God in that moment, and we had a legitimate conversation as a pastor at a church. I was like, does it make sense for us to tithe this month? Should we hold on to what God has given us to be able to pay this bill? And I remember asking God, like, should I do this? And Hannah and I were like, you know what? We got to trust God with our first fruits and trust that He will provide along the way. And so we decided to tithe and to give. And what was crazy is that the next day, we get a check in the mail from the IRS because I had some weird stuff from my 2020 taxes. And I got a check for exactly $700 from my 2019 taxes. It was unbelievable. And what's interesting is that's a silly example of me being an idiot and watering my lawn and asking, should I tithe or not? But God had been 4 years ago in me messing something up in my taxes, working together for my good, knowing that in the future I was gonna need the resources to pay for my water bill to keep my grass green. You see, we serve a God that shows up in the details. We serve a God that shows up in the midst of what we are going through. Man, what kind of God leads His people out of slavery to the Red Sea to have them just looking back and knowing that the army is chasing them down, not knowing where they're supposed to go, only to show His people how good and how mighty and how powerful He is to protect them. See, this morning I want to invite you just to stand to your feet in response. In just a moment, we're going to jump into a song of worship. But here's what I know. I want you to look up at me. I don't know what you've walked into this room with. I don't know what you need to trust God in. But here's what I know to be true this morning, church, is that we serve a God that is in our midst. We serve a God that is for you and not against you. He has gone ahead of you. I don't know what questions you are facing this morning, but here's what I know. We don't have to wait for Moses to part the Red Sea. We serve a God that sent His one and only Son, Jesus, to die and to stand in the gap so that you and I could have life. That we don't have to have it all figured out. We don't got to have all the right answers. We can take a faith step and trust that God is our protector and He is our provider. And so this morning, I just want to encourage you. The only proper response this morning for a God that is that good is for us to lift Him up and to sing His praises. And so let's lift our hands, church. Let's celebrate and let's thank God for what He's done in our lives. Let's worship this morning, church.